understand and respect his goal to support American workers, but I disagree with him that this is how to help them. I reject any attempts to weaken Canada, to wear us down.
My message to President Trump is knock it off. We will never be the 51st state, but we can, once again, be friends with the United States if the president reverses course on these disastrous tariff threats.
And to describe what has happened when Donald Trump stabbed us in the back, it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal, and Canadians are angry, but people in Windsor are pissed off. This feels like a betrayal, a gut punch, for absolutely no reason.
Donald Trump's trade war takes center stage yet again on this, the fifth day of Canada's 45th federal election campaign. Mark Carney was back in Ottawa for an emergency meeting with key cabinet ministers, crafting a response to Trump's 25% auto tariffs. Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh, as you just heard there, weighed in from the campaign trail, as well. Here to break down this country's tariff response and its implications for the election campaign is a special edition of our Front Bench panel. With us throughout the election campaign, former Liberal BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's now a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former interim Conservative leader Rona Ambrose, is with us. She's the deputy chairwoman of TD Securities. And former NDP MP and BC Minister Nathan Cullen is here. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to have you on our program. I appreciate you making the time. Christy, I'm going to start with you. Was it the right call not to pull the trigger on counter tariffs today and to essentially wait until if or when they are imposed, let's say next week?
I think it was. I think counter tariffs are a mixed bag for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, on flight 149 to Calgary, please make your way immediately.
Rhonda's at the airport.
I think, Rhonda, you got to board your flight. Yeah, it's coming right there. Start again, Christy. Sorry.
For once, the flight's leaving on time. And hold on a second. So, yeah, so I think it's a mixed bag. I think that the thing about counter tariffs is if you're building furniture in BC, for example, you can maybe buy your wood from BC, but maybe not the glue, maybe not the screws and those other things. So counter tariffs for sure have an impact on all the other industries that that we want to protect here. On the other hand, though, it is a really important political message to say, okay, look, you do this to us, we're not going to sit back and just let you do it. We're actually gonna punch you back. So I think there's wisdom in waiting. We may still have to do it, but I think there are a lot of people in the business community across the country who would say, wait a minute, forest industry's already been just absolutely devastated by provincial government policy in the country. We cannot afford to make it even harder by federal government policy on counter tariffs. So let's wait a little bit. And I don't think the forest industry is the only industry in the country where that's true.
So, Nathan, from a political perspective, the announcement yesterday sort of upended things insofar as Mark Carney became Prime Minister for the next 24 hours or so, came down to Ottawa. The other leaders were talking about it as well. But it did remind you of the couple of instances during the Ontario campaign, for example, where Doug Ford went to Washington in his capacity as Premier. Is it a challenge for opposition parties to punch through in a moment like this when the leader of the Liberals, in effect, does carry the mantle of holding government or being Prime Minister at a moment like this?
Yeah, it's an expectation. It's an interesting quirk of our moment right now that we need whoever goes into the campaign as the Prime Minister, who's not elected now, to do both jobs, run for his own political party, but also continue to make some decisions. There's as we all know, a caretaker responsibility where government's not meant to do extraordinary things while we're in a campaign period for obvious reasons to their own political benefit. So there's a bit of a line to walk, but I think Canadians are expecting Mr. Carney and others to continue to perform roles, particularly when the threats are so constant. I think there was some small hope from Premier Smith and others that maybe Mr. Trump, for maybe unfortunate political decision-making reasons, was going to lay off during our writ period. But his unpredictability, his willingness to continue to attack Canada against the interests of his own people, it goes worth mentioning every time that these tariffs do not help Americans, do not help American consumers. In fact, don't just hurt our relationship, but hurt individual families. And that the voice has to be very consistent. And we saw that in the clips from the various leaders, Jagmeet Singh and Pierre Poilievre, essentially echoing the need to at least have positionally this point. I don't know, to Christy's point, I don't know how long he can wait, though. I think if we're having significant tariffs that do come down on April 2nd, I think to continue to wait too long might be an indication to Mr. Trump's administration that here's an advantage that they can somehow use to their warped idea of a benefit to America.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan's point, Rana, that in essence, all the leaders of the political parties, they have different ways of communicating it, but everyone is saying eventually there needs to be a response from Canada, that it should be a strong response, and that we should be collectively standing up to Donald Trump and what he's trying to do to our economy. At the same time, again, politically, there were different strategies employed today. In particular, I'm thinking of the opposition parties who still remain on the campaign trail. The NDP switched gears. They went to Windsor. They decided to make the announcement about the tariffs and their plans for support for workers and things like that. Pierre Poilievre started off his comments certainly at his event talking about that and his plans, but kept the messaging around today being around the TFSA announcement that they wanted to make from a policy perspective. They kept that intact. Which strategy do you think is ultimately beneficial? Like, which one do you think was the right one?
Well, I think both of those things are important. I think focusing on affordability is still the primary issue that Canadians want political parties to focus on. It's still the top issue at every kitchen table. Of course, the issue with Donald Trump is right there, number two. But I think also we have to recognize that what the White House said today, we don't have that much clarity and certainty around this. So we're still waiting till April 2nd.
Right,
what the White House said today.
Is looking for passengers.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. You got a few minutes before you have to board.
What the White I'm so sorry. I'm heading back to Calgary. What the White House said today, though, was that Canadian. I'm sorry.
It's a very Canadian moment. It's okay.
Country, so.
We've all been there, Rona. We've all been there.
Yeah, we sure have.
It's going to end soon, I promise.
Okay, so I'll just say quickly, what we heard from the White House today was that Canadian auto parts will remain tariff-free for now, and Canadian cars will be tariffed for any non-U.S. materials, meaning Canadian materials, Mexican materials. As all of us know, the auto sector is so highly integrated; it feels almost impossible. I think a bit of this, a bit of this, or all of this, is a prelude to getting into the USMCA negotiation. Look, in the last USMCA negotiation, Trump was very clear: I want more auto content, auto materials from the U.S., made in the U.S., with U.S. jobs and North American vehicles, and he got that. I mean, at the end of the day, we got a good agreement, but the U.S. did get more U.S. content, U.S. materials, and North American cars. That meant he could go home, do a victory lap, and say, more U.S. jobs, more U.S. manufacturing at home. And I think he wants that again. So the sooner we push, whoever the prime minister is has to push hard to get to the USMCA negotiating table as quickly as possible. And I think this is exactly what Trump wants. He wants to renegotiate USMCA and come out of that again with more U.S. content and North American vehicles. And obviously, we have to push back on that.
Yeah, the irony is that's the deal that he negotiated. And
exactly.
Just on
he wants more.
Yeah, he wants more. That's true. I just did an interview with people who were in meeting with cabinet today, and they had, there is still confusion over whether the parts are subject to it, which parts, American made, that kind of stuff. Like the White House itself has yet to issue much clarity. Like the confusion does persist. Rana mentioned affordability versus Trump, and not to say versus like they're oppositional, but they seem to be the two dominant strains of the campaign, particularly at the beginning of the week. All the announcements were around affordability, but then an event like what happened yesterday swings things back to Trump. Ultimately, do you have a sense, do you think that this sort of consensus in the punditry class that it is all about Trump is accurate, or do you have a different sense?
My sense of it is all about Trump, in as much as he's just saying stuff and seeing what floats and what doesn't. I don't think he has a deep understanding of any of this stuff. He developed his understanding of this 40 years ago, or that was when he concluded why tariffs were necessary, and the world has changed so dramatically since then. And I think, though, the part of it that really is about Trump is, especially for the northern states, putting tariffs on Canadian goods is massively inflationary. Energy is, that translates into gas at the pumps, food. There's a whole bunch of other items that people will see massive inflationary increases quickly as a result of what's going on here. And so the question, I think, for Trump is, how long does he feel like he can sustain this trade war and without costing him so much in popular support that really he starts to lose his reputation amongst all those people who, quite frankly, stupidly voted for him, thinking he was going to protect the interests of the lower and middle class. He hasn't succeeded in doing it, and I think he's very vulnerable on that point. And, that does speak to the need for Canada to be strong, to be tough, and, maybe take some tough medicine, which I think is something that, all of the leaders recognize we may have to take to make this work.
Nathan, I want to ask you again about the politics of that question in particular around Trump. So a former leader of your party, Tom Mulcair, wrote a column this week for CTV essentially saying because of the existential nature of the threat of Trump, really your choices should only be between the two parties that have a feasible chance of forming government. I just read a few hours ago your response to that, and I'm wondering if you could share that, why you don't agree.
Well, I don't agree at a fundamental level with my former colleague, Tom, and for a couple of reasons. One, historically, you look back at the role the NDP has played in Canada in helping encourage, push, cajole, force governments into creating things that we hold dear, like public health care, employment insurance, old age pensions. The list should be well known, but it's worth repeating. The idea of simply standing aside, surrendering because things are tough is just not a New Democrat thing to do. If we had that, it would have been really hard to get women's rights, Indigenous rights into the Charter. It would have been hard to get all of those successes. So when we look at a moment like this, it's not just this 30 days, it's what comes next. And as Christy talked about and Rana, the pain of these tariffs are going to be felt for months and years to come. Yeah. There are going to be people out of jobs and that are going to need help. There are businesses that are going to need support from the government. And when I've watched our parliaments in the past, when parties have had all the power, particularly Liberals, there have been times where they've been quite cruel, getting out of public housing, slashing transfers on healthcare payments. So having a check and balance on power is absolutely critical. And the NDP does a good job of doing that. That would be an obvious and good role for Mr. Singh. I just think all of this, trying to understand Trump's motivations, I don't know if anyone on this call can figure it out, but we used to think the market would affect him. If the market slumped, then he may reverse course in some of his dumber ideas. That doesn't seem to be true anymore. In terms of pain to his own voters and constituents that Christy talked about, I'm not convinced that matters to him either, because this is going to be very painful. I guess what he's betting on is the pain is going to be worse here. We will lose more jobs. It will cost us more tariff, counter tariff, and he can outlast us and get to somehow a better trade deal that Rana talked about than the fantastic one that he signed with Canada in his first term. That was the best ever. So looking for logic is hard. I think working at the subnational level with governors to premiers, I think is going to be critical in the next couple of years. And whoever runs this country needs to keep communities and workers in mind. And that's what the NDP is trying to do. And that's why we should continue to have a strong voice in Parliament. I think to think otherwise is just surrendering because things are difficult. And that's not the New Democrat way.
Rana, I'll give you the last word. I have sort of a two-part question. Are Tories worried about the fact that public opinion polls in the aggregate do show a popular support for the NDP decreasing? Like usually a stronger NDP means better shot for the Conservatives against the Liberals. And second, how Nathan just laid out the unpredictability that we have been dealing with since the 20th of January. How much of a challenge does that make for anybody who forms government to come up with Canada's response?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say this, the unpredictability started in November. And let's just remember that for all intents and purposes, there was a pretty good chance, 50-50, that Donald Trump could get elected. So the fact that, I was with a group of investors this morning and they call the last decade the lost decade. Not the last decade, the lost decade economically, in terms of trying to get out there, attract capital investment into Canada. And we are still in that position. So far, since November, no government, not the last prime minister, not this prime minister, has made any policy announcements, changes, legislation that I have seen that will drastically, boldly transform our economy to become more resilient, stronger, more independent, up against this tariff crisis, but also once this is settled, or at least we have some certainty around it, whether it's reciprocal tariffs in perpetuity, to deal with the economy going forward. We have such a huge opportunity in this country to be the strongest economy in the Western world. We have all the parts to make that happen, but we have not made the right fiscal policy decisions. So it's time for that huge transformation. And I think that's what our party has to continue to be focused on. So you asked the question, should we talk about the tariffs or should we talk about topping up people's tax-free savings accounts? We should be doing both every single day. Should we be giving seniors a big tax cut and talking about the tariff crisis? We should be doing both. And that's what we did yesterday. Every single day, I want to hear from our party about what we're going to do to put money back in people's pockets, make life more affordable, give people a break. People are suffering all across this country. The tariff war is exacerbating that. But at some point, we'll have more clarity. And Trump will be gone one day. And we need to prepare for the next 20 years, not the next 2 weeks. And that has to happen with a brand new government with very bold policy.
Okay, well, we're going to have lots to talk about next week once those tariffs are supposedly announced, and we can discuss and debate the various policies being put forth. I appreciate all of you making the time. Really looking forward to seeing you during the campaign. Christy Clark, Ronna Ambrose, and Nathan Cullen.